Years ago, I joined Unity Temple, a UU congregational church and congregation in Oak Park, Illinois. I had my first child, I was thinking about having another, and I worked full-time. Don, my husband, and I had no family in the area, and I thought to myself, our family needs to be part of a larger community, and going to church seemed like a good fit. Don was raised UU, and I had no interest in returning to a Catholic church. So, in January, 25 years ago, off we went. One of the few times I stuck to a New Year's resolution. One of the appeals for me is that there was no creed, no rules to adhere to, but then I had to admit to myself, weeks later, sitting in the beautiful sanctuary, okay, I've changed my mind. Tell me what to believe. I don't have the time to figure it out. In the new members classes there, I did learn about our UU principles, a good fit for me, not a creed, but some guidelines and approaches to life, not just life on Sunday mornings, but all aspects of life, commuting to work, voting in elections, holding little hands, feeding the dog, and reading bedtime stories. And now I find myself here, a member of UUCGL. In these interesting times, I find that the first principle resonates with me, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Each and every human valued and respected, no matter where they came from, what they do for work, where they went to school, or what they have for dinner. The first principle brings us and is complemented by the second, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations. All people valued and respected. All people treated with justice and equity. I kept circling back to this as I did some reading recently on the history of slavery here and what is now the U.S. I learned some facts and dates that I was not aware of. Facts and dates are always a part of history. But I also heard stories and recognized that the long-lasting impact, the story, the legacy of slavery in the U.S. is still with us. This past summer, in August, the New York Times devoted its Sunday magazine to acknowledging the 400th anniversary of the first captured African people being sold to colonists in Virginia in 1619. It included many essays, including ones that touted the contributions made through the years by slaves and their descendants, and some hard-to-read details of slavery and race in the U.S. In August of 1619, about 20 Africans, kidnapped by the Portuguese and destined for the Caribbean, were captured by pirates, who then traded them for food and supplies from a colony in Virginia. And so began slavery in the future U.S., a year before the Pilgrims landed in Plymouth. There was plenty of slavery in what is now Europe and Asia in 1619, but it was never based on race. More on the origins of race in a bit. And the slaves were not thought of chattel, as property we worked hard or bought and sold. Old world slavery included captives from enemies in war, serfs and indentured servants, and were still considered human beings with some limited rights. People were also enslaved for a limited period of time to pay off a debt or pay for a crime. They were never considered property of others. American slavery changed from the old world practice to a race-based system treating humans as chattel. Chattel is defined as any property except for real estate. Humans were used as collateral for loans to expand an owner's business, mortgage to allow owners to buy more human chattel, thereby increasing return on the investment in cotton or rice or other labor-intensive industries, generating wealth and power for the white owners. Chattel slavery, based on race, was firmly established by laws in the colonies by the mid-1600s. It was based on the assumption that blacks were inferior and stripped them of their rights and respect and dignity. For the next few hundred years, many tried to prove this as a scientific fact. About 10 years ago, I was on a family vacation in California, where we visited the Science Museum at UC Berkeley. We discovered an exhibit about understanding race. I don't remember the details, but it confronted me, and I recognized that I had believed, up to that point, that race had a biological basis. The exhibit convinced me otherwise, and I came to understand that race is a social construct designed to benefit the white race. Us versus them, haves and have-nots. The exhibit later came to Boston, and we saw it again. I was so impressed with it that I called up the new high school principal here in Swampscott to try and convince him that every student should see this exhibit, but to no avail. Just because race is not biologically based, it is still real, a social construct with explicit and implicit results. Racism, hard to see sometimes, exists in our institutions and policies and still lingers with us today. Here are some key dates related to slavery. 1807, the international slave trade was banned, but slavery remained legal. Compromise of 1850 included the Fugitive Slave Act, where it required citizens to assist in the recovery of fugitives. The Dred Scott decision, the Supreme Court ruled descendants of slaves were not citizens. The Emancipation Proclamation in 1863 was an executive order issued by Lincoln. It changed the legal status from slave to free of more than 3.5 million enslaved African Americans in the Confederate States. An escaped slave had to cross over the Union lines to be free. The remaining slaves held outside the Confederate States were freed later, either by state law or the 13th Amendment, which was passed and ratified in 1865. The 14th, that granted a citizen and equal rights and legal rights to African American slaves, was in 1868. And the 15th, which stated that the citizen's right to vote should not be denied on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude, was 1869. From 1865 to 1877, we had the Reconstruction. While I remember learning in history class that it ultimately failed, something about carpetbaggers, the real and enduring legacy were the Black Codes and Jim Crow laws that rolled back some of the changes of the 13th and 14th Amendment. But Reconstruction's temporary success was perhaps a snapshot of our ideal selves. Blacks and whites were elected to state legislatures that wrote progressive state constitutions and established for the first time free public schools in the South for whites and blacks. Blacks were elected to Congress and held other positions. One of the tangible results of this tumultuous history is the wealth gap that exists even today between the races. How did this occur? Let's take a step back. How did America become the wealthiest nation in the world? How did the brand new country back in the 1700s pay off its war debts so quickly? The wealth of the colonies and subsequently of the United States was based on natural resource, and land, a plentiful resource, required hard labor to extract value. African slaves did the brutally hard work of clearing land, growing and picking cotton, rice, and sugarcane. We think today that the global economy is new, but it was up and running centuries ago. At one point, cotton was the nation's most valuable commodity and a major export. The U.S. was providing 2/3 of the world's cotton. To a large extent, the wealth of the nation was built on the backs of slaves, wealth accrued to whites but denied to blacks. Since then, institutional program and policies have continued to add to the wealth gap. In 2016, white families had a median net worth of $171,000, compared with $17,600 for blacks. While some whites have legacy wealth, a vast majority took advantage of the programs in the 1900s, just last century, ostensibly for all, but in practice, mostly benefiting whites. The Federal Housing Authority was set up in 1934 in part to assist people to buy homes, a common way to create wealth. But it employed redlining, identifying neighborhoods and areas off limits due to supposed increased risk. What was the result? Most of the assistance went to whites, and blacks did not participate in the middle class growth last century. The GI Bill benefited many more whites due to school segregation and the lack of black colleges. and it is still happening today. For example, an innocent-looking rule or directive established in a manner that favors whites and not people of color. The work requirement established by some states for Medicaid recipients can be subject to waivers. Some states use the waivers, and the rural poor, who tend to be white, are not required to work. The urban poor, overwhelmingly people of color, must meet the work requirement or lose health coverage. What can we do? I've gone to meetings and workshops on racism. Excuse me, I'm just gonna. I've gone to meetings and workshops on racism and racial justice, and I notice the tenor of them is changing. From a personal focus, personal bigotry, however unintended, to focus on institutional racism, bigotry with power behind it. While we should continue to examine our personal prejudices, we need to take a hard look and understand institutional racism. One of the challenges of examining racism in diverse groups is that for people of color, sometimes the work shifts from working on racism to comforting white people. Whites who either feel terrible about recognizing some implicit bias or bigotry within themselves, or ashamed and overwhelmed by violent racist acts by others. ECHO, Essex County Community Organization, is now embarking on an interesting journey. Within the group, we have race-based caucuses. The White Caucus focuses on understanding our history and our role as it relates to race. Several from UUCGL are participating, and the next meeting is Thursday night. Please join us. And I have helped with a similar workshop, Dismantling Race, a workshop for whites at First Church in Swampscott with a friend from ECHO. Mark LaPointe, our Community Life and Learning Director, and I are planning to do the same here, though no date has been set yet. These meetings can be a bit messy, maybe make you uncomfortable, but it circles back to our principles: inherent worth and dignity of every person, compassion, equity, justice, and human relations. Here at UUCGL, considering and working towards providing sanctuary is a bold step for us. We are standing up to powerful systems that treat immigrants in unimaginable ways. But now we have seen photos of those very ways, of young children separated from parents in cages, rules that say children locked up together cannot touch, comfort, or hug each other, and how the lack of medical care has led to deaths. So be bold, participate, educate yourself. Let's not disappoint the legacy of Martin Luther King. Let's not be moderate and insist now is not the time for inner reflection, not the time to deny, though race is a social construct, that many of us, as white people, have had advantages not afforded people of color. In my reading and researching, I watched a PBS video about the life of Howard Thurman. I didn't recognize his name, and coincidentally, Debbie sent me a reading by him that she wanted to include and did read today. His words and deeds resonated with me as a UU. Therefore, it seemed serendipitous yesterday when I went to find a quote from Thurman that my old alma mater, Boston University, had just posted about its grand opening for the new Howard Thurman Center for the Common Good. I leave you with these words from that announcement. Maybe we should open our own center with a similar mission. Do you have the guts to challenge your own thinking? In a world of locked minds, can you open yours? Our mission is to connect through shared experiences, shared creative experiences, exchange ideas, and explore differences. Thank you.